All right, it is 12:31 Eastern Time, so we're going to get started. So a good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're sitting in the country right now. Thank you for joining us today to review our first ever survey focused on all of our talent and candidates to find out what drives and motivates them in their job search. So before we get into any of the fun details, I have to read some of the techie stuff. So you should see a presentation on your screen and hopefully hear me right now. If you have any problems seeing or hearing, please make sure you're joining this event in Chrome and at your Chrome browser is updated to the latest version. In addition, if you see a message saying you've entered the event in webcast mode, click the three dots on the top right of your screen and click exit webcast mode. If you have any technical problems, including error messages about a firewall, please chat into the chat box, and our support team will reach out to you directly to help troubleshoot and resolve. Speaking of that chat box, please feel free to chat any questions throughout. At the end of the presentation, Lynn and I will spend time answering those questions. And since the most obvious question is, will this recording be available after the webinar? Absolutely, it'll be available after the webinar. All right, so for our agenda today, first we're going to do a little bit of a welcome and intro. We'll spend the bulk of our time going through the survey results and talking about any of the data and some of the insights with it. Like I mentioned, the Q&A at the end. So my name is Tim Gearhart. I'm the VP of Talent Delivery, and I've been with Cella for over 20 years. Lynn White is joining me on the webinar to review the data and results.
Thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned, my name's Lynn White. I am the Recruiting and Delivery Manager of the Southeast region. I'm with Cella for 7 years, and I couldn't be more excited to be here to present today.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynn. For those of you who may not know Cella, we are an award-winning leader in consulting, staffing, and managed solutions for creative, marketing, digital, and proposal development teams. We are passionate about helping people build meaningful careers and partnering with organizations to help them win. We are the only nationwide creative staffing firm to be recognized for our service excellence through an award called Best of Staffing for 12 years running. As Lynn said, we couldn't be more excited to spend this time together reviewing this information. It's the first annual survey focused on understanding talent and candidates and what drives and motivates them. The responses from this help inform us how we work with them, but also gives us the chance to share all the results with you so you know the best way to work and interact with job seekers. And some of the items we're going to walk through: culture, remote work, work-life balance, benefits, comp, interview process, interview speed, all those types of things. So Lynn's going to share some of the details of who the survey went out to and how many individuals took the survey. But just so you know that our main focus was broadcasting it to our candidate base, as well as just general job seekers within the creative marketing and digital community. So all that being said, we'd like to personally thank you for attending this survey review, as I know from the presentation with the candidates that we did last week that they're all excited for you to hear this content as well. All right, I hope that you're all comfy and ready to roll, because there's a lot of data and a lot of good things to unpack here. So as I share this executive summary with you all to glance through, I'm going to walk you through just a general story and overall vibe. Let's start with the obvious statement here. I mean, COVID has obviously had an impact with these survey results. And the primary spot we're going to see this is through stuff related to remote work, both what's happening now and what people are looking for going on in the future. But some of the things they just don't change. I mean, things, how important culture is and the direct manager is, comp, having advancement opportunities, feeling inspired, work-life balance, those all came out and are always things that stay the same ultimately. So as we move through some other key takeaways, is job seekers don't spend a lot of time looking for work. I mean, it's important to make sure that you capture their attention quickly with key points. Anything over 3 interviews, it's just too much is what we're hearing. And finally, over 60% of responders said a positive DEI policy is either very important or important in their job search. All right, a little bit before we get into the data, I wanted to spend some time talking through an interesting paper written by MC, who is a leading provider of labor market data. They published a 40-page paper titled "The Demographic Drought: How the Approaching Sandemic Will Transform the Labor Market for the Rest of Our Lives." I never heard of Sandemic before, but what that means is without people. So I'm going to walk through the 3 key points, or at least 3 of the key points in the paper, but bear with me, there's a lot to unpack here. So in February 2020, a record 70% of US businesses reported a talent shortage, which was more than double the 32% of businesses who reported difficulty finding talent just 5 years earlier in 2015. And everyone thought when COVID hit and unemployment spiked that some of these talent shortages would just vanish away, but that just didn't happen. And there's 3 pre-existing conditions that really magnified this in 2020. So first, there's this mass exodus of baby boomers. In normal years, 2 million baby boomers retire, but in 2020, 3 million retired. This group are highly experienced and very hard to replace. Then there's the record low labor force participation rate of prime age Americans. A few different pieces factor into this part. So first, 2.4 million women left the workforce in 2020. And on top of that, the prime age male workforce plunged from 94% in 1980 to 89% in 2019. So while a 5% drop doesn't sound crazy, that actually represents 3 million missing workers. Then you have that millennials are expected to inherit $68 trillion from their boomer parents, making them the wealthiest generation in history and making them potentially less motivated to seek careers of their own. And finally, there are more males living at home with their parents through the age of 34 than any other generation. On top of that, males increasingly prefer part-time over full-time work. So all those factor into this low labor force participation rate. And then the last condition that you see here is that it's the lowest birth rate in US history, as we're below the population replacement levels of 2.1 births per woman. That was a lot of information, but all it's saying is this is part of the cause of the shortfall we're seeing now, but even more so in the future, as it's a shortfall of 6 million workers in the next 7 years, creating competition for job seekers that don't actually even exist. So I know all that sounds pretty grim and depressing, but there are things we can do to compensate. The summary at the end of this paper came back to these 3 words. It's value people more. And there's 4 things that they highlighted related to this. Cultivate, reskill, retain older workers. Try to retain people past the age of 65. Focus on flexible or reduced hours, mobility, and recognition. Build a talent base yourself. Bring in people and train on what you need them to know. And last is partner with higher education and provide on-the-job training. Get them when they're just entering the workforce in experience and skill them up.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. So who completed the 2021 talent survey? For our first ever talent survey, we had a whopping 408 participants ranging from a variety of skill sets and industries across our country. 60% of the respondents were located on the East and West Coast. Millennials led the pack. So we surveyed a wide variety of generations, and that data shows that almost half of our respondents were millennials. The other generations that completed the survey were baby boomers, Gen X, and Gen Z. We wanted to take a look at who completed the survey. Were they individual contributors or managers? And while majority of the respondents were millennials, it's interesting to see that over 70% of the folks that we surveyed are in an individual contributor role. I found this information pretty neat because as we go through the rest of this presentation, we're going to be able to hear from the employee's point of view versus the managers and what they're wanting and desiring. And then to take it a step further, we asked in the survey what their current employment situation was. So the data shows here that 50% of the respondents are currently working through a staffing firm or freelancing. 33% were employed directly with the company, and less than 10% are in between projects and assignments.
All right, so as this slide says, if we're up to job seekers and workers, remote work is here to stay. 7 out of 10 are working remotely full-time, and 87% either full-time or part-time. What's interesting, though, as we go to the next slide, is that COVID's only responsible for 63% of people working remotely. So that just means that about 40% of the people currently working remotely or part-time remote, so either full-time or part-time, were doing it all before the pandemic, but it's really not a surprise. I mean, this industry's always been at the forefront of remote work. So while many other industries struggle to make that transition to fully virtual work, you all made that transition so much easier. No surprise here either, but a whopping 92% of responders prefer either working remotely full-time or a mix. So I want to take this opportunity to share a little bit about what we're hearing from our candidates, outside of this survey, just in everyday conversations. And it's really similar to this when it comes down to it, is candidates are turning down even exploring opportunities if there isn't at least some sort of remote game plan in place. But even in many cases, we're hearing candidates that are just turning down roles if there isn't even any on-site component at all. With the incredible demand for talent in our space, many know that they can hold out for full-time remote work. So it's such an emphasis on attracting top talent. The companies that are able to be flexible as possible for remote work will attract the best talent. And again, this data shows that just under 50% prefer full-time remote. So if you're able to provide that, you're going to be able to tap into and access that many more candidates that other companies won't.
Why do industry professionals leave their organizations behind? So give me the same job, pay, and benefits, and I'll say yes. In this question, we asked that if talent were offered a similar position at another organization with equal compensation and similar benefits, how likely were they to accept? 51% of the participants shared that they would make a lateral move if they were offered the same compensation package at a different company. So what does that mean? I think my biggest takeaway here is that the information shows that while compensation and benefits typically are the important reasons that employees are staying or leaving a company, there are other factors that are playing into this. In a few slides, we will dig a little bit deeper to really identify the biggest drivers that are motivating job seekers to leave their current employment. 41% planning to leave their current employer. Almost half of the respondents that we surveyed are looking to leave their current employer. I found this especially interesting because I felt as though 41% was a larger stat than what I would have envisioned. I know Tim had mentioned earlier on that COVID, no doubt has played some sort of impact in the numbers that we're going to see today. So I'm curious, Tim, what are your thoughts on this slide?
Yeah, Lynn, I mean, ultimately, I think the numbers seem pretty in line with what I hear and what I read, what I see in the news media as well. I think it's a couple things. You mentioned COVID. I think that plays into it. But first, it's just a hot market, right? I mean, so many people are hiring. So you have people that are currently employed that just want to take advantage of it and see what's out there at this point in time, and just see what type of opportunities, what kind of pay, what kind of benefits, just what else is out there. But then you do have this buildup from COVID of where people were ready to make a move, right? And there's always a cycle of when people have outlived where they are. And so you had that happen, but then people didn't want to leave because there weren't opportunities, because obviously they wanted to stay with their health insurance. So, for all the reasons we know. So you have this bottleneck of people who are looking to leave right now because of the hot market, but then the people that were thinking about leaving, a year, even 18 months ago, that didn't make that move, and now it's bottlenecked up as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think also then that ties into right now just the importance of ways organizations can retain people, just given the tight market and the demand for talent. Poor leadership and a toxic environment drive talent away. So why are talent resigning and making a move? As mentioned earlier, the respondents shared that they would make a lateral move even if they were offered the same benefits. This data portrays the many reasons talent are leaving their role. Toxic environment and poor leadership were the top two reasons that are driving employees to look elsewhere.
So what do creative marketing and digital talent want most? Well, let's start with this slide. So based off the responses here, they want companies to make it fast and easy to find opportunities and apply. On average, the participants said they only spend 1 to 3 hours in an entire week looking for work. So Lynn and I were talking about this beforehand, and there are a few things that came to mind is, job seekers have so many roles to choose from right now that in many cases, they're hearing from recruiters or companies directly. Then on top of that, if it's anything like what we're doing to attract our own internal candidates right now, so much of it is referral based. So not only are companies competing against each other for grabbing attention, but then they're competing against job seekers who don't even have to proactively look for any work, which is why I think you see this number being only 1 to 3 hours. So no surprise based off the last slide that the main way that participants want to have the content delivered is through the channels they already spend their time on. But as you look at the other responses, most of the answers are things that can actually be served up on social media. So it's really important to use a variety of different content pieces, but make sure it's being delivered on social media to have the biggest impact. Which leads into this next slide of showing the social platforms where job seekers look for jobs the most. No surprise, LinkedIn is by far and above everything else, right? 49% here. I mean, it's a social media platform built for the business world. But Lynn, it is interesting to see how many people look for jobs on other ones listed here. I mean, in fact, 50% more than LinkedIn. So more than 50% combined consider these non-traditional platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram when searching for work. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's interesting because when you think of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram being used for job searching, it's different because typically you use these platforms for sharing content, liking photos, just scrolling through your news feed. But if you remember, when we looked at who completed our survey, we had 46% of the participants who were millennials. And this generation has been using and evolving with the social media platforms since it has begun. And when you really think about it, Facebook has so many groups and networking opportunities associated with different skill sets and different areas of expertise. Job seekers are able to directly connect or message one another, ultimately leading to job leads. And then Twitter and Instagram. So you can simply search hashtags relevant to a specific industry or job title and identify job leads that way. So I really like this stat because it shares with everybody today that there's different ways to get the most out of their job ad placements.
Love it, Lynn. And, when we were talking about this earlier, and you were talking about some of these things too, it is also so important that it's not just the company's philosophy and how they use social media and put ads on these sites, but it's how you reshare information to make sure that you're tapping into your network as well. So think about, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, that it's not just how the company's philosophy and strategy is, but then how the individuals post that information out there as well to tap into your own networks.
Love that.
All right, so many of the questions we asked during the survey, they're pretty similar with slight differences. In this question, we asked what job seekers are looking for when they're researching the potential employer. Remote continues to lead the way here, but not far behind are comp and benefits. So, as we talked about earlier, being as flexible as possible with the remote work gives you access to more job seekers. If your comp and benefits aren't in line with the current market, you're gonna have a hard time getting your offers accepted. Maybe you're tapping into more people, but if the other pieces aren't there, you're just not gonna be able to move forward and actually get those people hired on. So this is a really important slide we wanted to share here. Company reputation, so important when attracting top talent. The majority of talent use sources like this to research companies. Job seekers are actively feeling out companies the same way that companies are vetting candidates. So whether your company has a strategy with managing Glassdoor or managing LinkedIn or doesn't, job seekers are still going there to read reviews about your company. So if you don't have a game plan with these tools, definitely think about putting something in place. When we had this presentation last week with the candidates, Lynn, you shared a couple of insights from your perspective as well. If you don't mind sharing some here as well, it'd be great.
Yeah, of course. So as you can see here, 50% of the job seekers are going online and they're reading reviews on Glassdoor. We see this enough on my team where candidates have not proceeded with job opportunities simply because of a poor Glassdoor review. And you mentioned how important it is for companies to have a strategy in place for these poor reviews. And later on in the presentation, I am actually going to cover a statistic specifically related to candidates withdrawing from the interview process because of just reading a poor review.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Lynn. All right, now we're getting into what job seekers are looking for when job searching. So the top two are work-life balance and remote. And we obviously, again, already spoke about remote side. But I think the work-life balance plays into remote in two different competing ways, actually, as well. Not having a commute and working from home, it gives the ability to spend more time with family, get errands done in the middle of the day that used to be a weekend thing or taking half a day off. But on the flip side, we hear people getting burned out because they feel like they never leave the office, right? When your home is your office. So it's becoming that much more important to have companies and managers who understand the balance. And again, it connects back to what Lynn talked about beforehand with a toxic environment and that relationship with the direct managers. And again, not far behind is comp. While it might not be the number one thing listed here, comp is why obviously we all work. So ensuring you're paying competitive salaries and have competitive benefits is crucial to not only getting those acceptances we talked about, for retention purposes as well. And Lynn has some more data related to this in the next slides near the end that she'll walk through everything as well. One last thing though on the slide is that Lynn and I found it interesting that the DEI part was listed last on this list. But as I mentioned beforehand, when we pulled it out into its own actual question, we see that more than 60% said a company's DEI policy would influence their job search. So some insight I could provide here is over the past couple of years, we're hearing from our own internal staff how important DEI is with Cella, not just with the internal teams, but also how we approach it with job seekers and our clients. In fact, our DEI council is made up of 25% of our entire company. And within that, more than half are either on the recruitment or sales side of our business. And one of the areas we focused and been working on with our clients and candidates is on asking our candidates what pronouns they use and incorporating that when discussing our candidates with clients. We want to ensure that we're representing our candidates the way they represent themselves. So overall, I think we're going to see this number just continue to grow when it comes down to it. And staying on the same track, diversity job boards are growing in popularity. 22% of the job seekers responded that they use diversity job boards when looking for work. So again, I expect to see that number grow. So it's that much more important to make sure your postings are on these sites if they aren't. And you can see that the data is pretty spread out between the different diversity job boards. So it's important that you're using as many of these as possible to access as many top talent as there are. And there are companies out there that you can partner with that help with ensuring your ads are hitting these diversity sites, so you don't have to manage these all separately. So benefits also came up high on that list for that question about what job seekers are looking for, which is obviously no surprise. So we asked the question outside of health benefits, what other benefits are important? And no surprise again, remote work is here, right? But the fact that it's so much higher is actually pretty surprising when it comes down to it. 401k and retirement planning is there. It's still funny how it's not as high as the remote work, or at least like it's still 20 percentage points off. As you look through the list, there's a big drop off for the rest of these, but I did want to focus on the next 4 on this list because they are all things that we classified as work-life balance when it comes down to it. So whether it's the PTO, mental health, gym memberships, or access to professional development, they're all things that job seekers are saying are important, which goes back to why the whole package is so important. So as we round out this section, we asked more about professional development, and we asked what opportunities they would take advantage of. And overwhelmingly, the response was, if they were offered, they'd be taken advantage of. So hard skills led the way here, with soft skills still being heavily represented. One of the things I was talking to Lynn about is while leadership and management training might not be the highest on the list from the candidate perspective, it's something that should definitely be extremely high on your list. Promoting managers and leaders from within is incredibly important with retention, but also with your ability to attract new employees. We asked in a separate question related to PD is if the job seekers and workers expect for the company to pay for all or part of the PD efforts, and more than 50% said yes. So this goes back to retention again. It's so hard to attract new candidates. So first and foremost needs to be that you're taking care of your existing employees. You don't want to be constantly just spinning your wheels with not only adding new employees, but then also backfilling employees who left. And our last slide in this section takes the job search from just a different angle and simply asked what drives them away from applying. More than double any other response was that the role just doesn't sound appealing. So while it may be the right job title, if the ad doesn't actually build excitement around the role, job seekers are just walking away. So as you're thinking about your own job descriptions, think about them not just what you need the employee to do, but build some excitement around the role as well. It's tough to count on HR departments to do that for you because generally speaking, they're not experts within an industry. So you building that excitement around it is going to do much more for that job being posted as well. And finally, grouped together at the bottom of this is remote friend again and location not far behind. Because if it is on site, that whole factor of if it is remote or if it is on site, you still want to have something that's a lot closer by, so you're not spending as much time in traffic and commuting back and forth.
Interviewing and job offers. So let's take a peek at what the talent said. So the talent's view on interviewing. So when it comes to interviewing, the respondents shared that they are open to in-person or virtual interviews. It was actually almost 50-50. It seems also that it is still very important to the talent that they are meeting with more than just one person in the interview process. I feel like this slide can be tied back to job seekers finding it super lucrative to meet multiple team members, to understand the team dynamic, the work environment, collaboration, and culture. The thing to keep in mind about this slide is that talent want to meet with more than one person in the interview process. However, there is a fine line when involving team members in this interview process. You want to be careful that you're not adding too many steps or dragging the interview process out. I'll keep moving for now because I do want to explain and dig a little bit deeper into what this means in the next slide. So when do interviews become excessive? So while many of the respondents had answered that they want to meet the team members and they are open to either virtual or in person, the talent shared that anything over 3 rounds of interviews is just too much. 1 round was not enough. 56% of the respondents shared that 3 rounds of interviews is the appropriate number of steps in the interview process. So last week, when Tim and I presented this information to our talent, we were curious to get their thoughts, and we asked the audience, at what point in the interview process have they walked away from an opportunity? So when we launched the poll during the event last week, we asked them, are they walking away from an interview because perhaps there was a client assessment, maybe a writing or a design project involved? Were there just too many steps in the interview process? Maybe they didn't relate to the hiring manager. Perhaps it was just too slow moving of the interview process from the time of when they started to when they got scheduled for the next round to learn feedback. Or did they stumble upon those poor reviews that Tim and I were talking about earlier on Glassdoor? The audience shared that 38% said, I'm walking away from the interview process if it's just too slow. So that sounds to me like either they're fielding multiple opportunities, they've got other things that may be moving a little bit faster. So they're going to really focus on that particular interview process. 21% just didn't relate to the hiring manager. So kind of going back to the toxic environment, the culture, if a talent is interviewing and they're finding that, something's not right, or I'm not really meshing with this manager, at that point, they're walking away. And one thing to keep in mind is just as much as hiring managers are interviewing talent for their team, the talent are interviewing these organizations and managers just as much. Too many steps, 16% said, I'm out. 14% of the group said client assessments were a reason for them to walk away. And then those Glassdoor reviews, which we had shared earlier, if you have a strategy in place, we can really eliminate this. But 11% of folks said that they would walk away because of a poor review or client reputation online. When is bending a little a big issue? So we asked, would you accept a job offer if you liked the potential manager, but the salary was 5 to 10% lower than you expected? So these next 3 slides, we basically asked the same question, but with a few trade-offs. And what you will see is there has to be some give and take. So in this particular question, when the talent liked the manager, but maybe the salary was just a little bit lower than they had expected, 45% of the talent said yes, they would still accept that offer because they did hit it off with the manager. Same question, but we had a trade-off here. So would you accept a job offer if it included those excellent benefits, but it still fell 5 to 10% short of your desired salary? 53% of the group still said yes. And here, same type of question, but we did a bump in the compensation versus those insufficient benefits. We asked, would you accept a job offer if the benefits didn't meet your needs, but you would be receiving a 5% to 10% increase in compensation? And we had more than half, 56%, still said yes. So when I look back at these 3 different slides and the different scenarios and situations, the ideal situation is if you are a company that can offer the top-notch salary, top-notch benefits, have top-notch managers and people in place, then you sprinkle in some good reviews online, the remote flexibility that our talent are seeking, you are offering the whole package. But let's say your company does have some sort of deficiency in that offer package. We see here that it's important to be aware of those deficiencies, but make up of it and overcompensate in other areas. So there's certainly different ways to compete and attract the top talent, even if you aren't able to hit all of these key points that talent are looking for.
Yeah, Lynn, I love the summary of all of that at the end, because it's interesting to ask each question so individually like that, and ask if you're pushing one up and the other one's not there, how does that balance? We could have probably asked how many other iterations of that to see how that all played out. Having the last one be comp related, and that's the one that's the highest, and other things being lower, and having that be the one that's the highest percentage of saying yes, does play into what we're talking about here. But they all balance that way, right? Everywhere that you said a give and take is important for that aspect. So it's just, again, we could have asked it 95 different ways, I'm sure, but it is interesting to see each time you play that out. So thanks for that summary of stuff.
Absolutely.
All right, so that is actually the end of the survey details of Lynn and I walking through and offering any insight for it. So we're gonna move into the questions and answers side. If you haven't popped any questions in and have any questions related to this data, please feel free to pop that in. This all information will be shared with you after. Again, the whole webinar will be available to download, and the slides will probably be available as well to look through. So all that will be there. There was a question that came up earlier about the different reasons why people resign a position. And I'll just run through a couple of them real quick. As Lynn mentioned beforehand, toxic environment and poor leadership were by far the highest. I mean, it was like a select all type of situation. They were 54 and 51%, so above anything else. The next couple were no opportunity for career advancement, not feeling valued in your role, and increased pay. So those are the top 5 things that were on that list. Lynn, one of the other questions I saw beforehand was related to the poll that you had posted up there. And it was talking about the different reasons why people have walked away, and client assessments was on there. It wasn't high on the list with client assessments. I'm curious to hear from you and your team, like what type of client assessments that you see, and what do you hear from candidates when a client assessment does pop up in the process?
Yeah. So typically we see clients want to have a good understanding of the talents, technical capabilities. Let's say it's a design assessment. They want to see them work through InDesign and provide the deliverable. Or if it's an opportunity that requires strong writing skills, we've seen some sort of writing assessment. The one thing that I'll share is if we're able, if you're partnering with a staffing firm, if the recruiter is able to set those expectations up front with talent as they go into the interview process, I'm seeing way more success with candidates being open to taking that assessment. And the other piece would be if it's at least like 2 hours or less. Anything over that 2-hour mark that's requiring talent to work on the assessment, I've seen talent say, I'm job seeking, I'm perhaps working full time, I have a family, I just don't have the time to put towards this assessment right now. So my key things would be, we do have situations where hiring managers want to have some sort of assessment, understood, but I think being able to set that expectation up front in the interview process so talent know what they are walking into, and then having that assessment take probably, I'd say, less than about 2 hours of someone's time is fair. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. It's so many clients don't do it. Some clients have things that they do consistently. So I know we run into that here and there. I did see another question pop up, and I'll take this one, is the question about how do you prefer to interview? And it was split of almost a 50-50. It was 53% said virtual and 47% said in person. Right now, obviously, the in-person side of interviews just isn't really happening in a lot of places. I mean, Lynn, I'm not even sure how many of your team have actually set up. I think I heard on one of our meetings recently, like the first in-person interview was set up at one of our client sites in the Northeast at one point. So I know it's not happening a ton overall, but the question was prefer. So there still is that interaction of that people want to know what the culture is by seeing someone face to face and having that relationship. So I think what we're going to see is maybe that first and second round interviews still be virtual focused, where it's a lot easier to tap into passive candidates that way. You can more easily get their time than having to take a half a day off to go in and do something on person when maybe they're not fully interested but want to hear more. So there's more to tap into with the virtual, but maybe having a second or third round sort of face-to-face meet and greet once you've established that this does look good and we want to move forward with things. So, I know from my perspective, I'd love to have that when hiring internally. It's interesting to see on both sides. Clients want to see that, and talent and candidates want to see that as part of the overall process as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think especially if, talent are local to the organization and they have the opportunity to go in, they want to go in and meet and see the team, the culture, and get a really great idea of that position before accepting.
Yeah, for sure. And then, remote versus virtual, right? I mean, remote versus on-site is what I should be saying. We talked about that a lot. It's so different everywhere. I mean, obviously the country is very different when it comes down to it too. But remote is because we had that can of worms open from a remote and virtual perspective. Candidates want to see more of that. They want to have that opportunity to work with clients that maybe they don't have to move to go work with, or maybe they've moved out of some of the cities and still want to work with those clients when they live somewhere that's more affordable. So you see more and more of that. I mean, it was definitely a mass exodus of some of the big cities where people moved away from some of that. So more and more candidates actually want to definitely have that opportunity to still work on those roles. And there are a lot of companies that have moved fully virtual and fully remote. So we see a lot more of that. We do start to hear some clients talk about having some sort of remote but local, wanting people to be close by to come in for meetings, come in for maybe 2 to 3 days a week. And it does pop up for sure. But I'm definitely hearing a lot more candidates saying, I'm not ready for that, or I've seen now that I can work fully remote, so I don't want to go back to that on-site component, even if it is a portion of time. So we're definitely seeing a mixture of those different pieces.
And then one piece I'll just add on that is something that, you don't even really think about, but we actually had a situation come up recently is, some of the talent, you don't know situation may be too. So like the reasons that they're fielding remote opportunities only, like one thing that had come up was, well, I don't feel comfortable taking public transportation right now, and that's my means of getting to an on-site location. So there's, not only just I want remote flexibility, we're seeing even just individuals having different situations for the reasons why that they are seeking that remote opportunity because it's more comfortable for them right now.
Love it. Love it. Have a comment in here about job descriptions and how there isn't a lot of insight a lot of times within the culture of the company, and even being turned off by the language. And that was one of the things we saw before as far as what drives people away from applying to an opportunity. And that job description of just not sounding appealing was so high up on a list. I mean, again, it was double everything else that we saw on that list. And there's a good comment related to the same thing of just being, sometimes put off by what the language is. And that's where I went back to. It's really important for the hiring manager themselves to be involved in any way, shape, or form they can with the job description and the ad itself. So much of the time it's, let me put a checkbox or a checklist of all the things I need this person to do, rather than the excitement around what they're accomplishing, what they're doing, what the culture is, what it's like to actually work there, and mapping that all out. While we talked about Glassdoor and LinkedIn, a lot of people go there, and most people go to those before they explore the opportunity. They do that once they see a job ad that excites them to begin with. So if you're losing people from not even being able to learn about your culture because the job ad doesn't even build excitement first, you've already lost. So having more excitement related to that, having more of what this role really feels like from a culture perspective, both the role and the company within that, is really crucially important. All right. I don't see any other questions in here at this point, so I think we hit everything else. Is there any other questions anyone wants to pop into the chat room before we say our goodbyes? All right. Well, thank you again for joining. Definitely a pleasure walking through this information. As I mentioned, we went through this with the candidates last week as well. They were excited to have this material not just be in our hands because obviously the way we interact with them, but to be in your hands because of the way that you all interact with them as well. So that was an exciting part, and I know they were excited for that piece of it as well. If you have any follow-up questions, you could feel free to reach out to us directly through cellainc.com. You can reach out to Lynn and I directly as well. Again, this all will be available for everyone after the webinar, and thank you for joining today.
Thank you.